Okay, let's wrap up this baby with this final section on regional developments in the responses to food crises. Recent global crises have led to diverse impacts across the world's low and middle income regions, reflecting local conditions and differing policy responses. These effects are often compounded by more local shocks and crises, including prolonged conflict and violence, natural disasters, and fragile economic and governance systems. This section examines the impacts of recent food crises to identify both future risks and promising policy options that could improve early warning, immediate response, and resilience building in each region. I'm not going to read all the regions, just as examples I've chosen some very subjectively. You can go back and read the report for the other regions as well. Main points: pursuing a humanitarian development peace or HDP nexus approach to Africa's protracted crisis. So humanitarian crisis and economic development and peace, including how women are treated, always depend on each other. There's a positive feedback between them, which can of course amplify the good things, or they can completely crash the whole system. Reducing reliance on food imports in the Middle East and North Africa, diversifying trade and improving governance for great resilience in Central Asia, increasing smallholder productivity and sustainability in South Asia. Land gets split between family members as generations keep creating nuclear families, and you end up with lots of smallholder farms, which become kind of problematic in doing things on a larger scale that the scale of productivity drops. Building regional integration in East and Southeast Asia to better manage future crises, managing commodity cycles, and building human capital in Latin America and the Caribbean. Okay, so Africa's conclusion is this way. I'm not going to go through all the details that is provided. This gives you a sense of what is being recommended and what is learned. About 20% of Africa's population is food insecure and undernourished, more than double the population share in any other region of the world. So this remains a problem for Africa that's become quite chronic. Multiple crises in recent years, conflicts, natural disasters, disease, and economic shocks have increased food insecurity across the continent. National and international actors, including governments, even agencies and NGOs, as well as affected local communities and households themselves, are responding to the growing impact of crises in various ways, including through humanitarian assistance, early warning systems, migration, and resilience building. Good news, but it's always a question of whether it's happening fast enough and large enough scale, covering enough people. Crisis interventions that are responsive to gender are also critical to reducing disproportional impacts on women and girls. This is especially true in poor countries where women tend to have even fewer rights and agency. However, the costs associated with these responses are enormous and underfunded. The humanitarian development peace nexus approach offers a promising means to address the multifaceted nature of food crises more cost effectively in the short to medium term. For the longer term, however, repurposing current public support to food and agriculture will be critical to reduce the cost and increase the availability of nutritious foods. This multifaceted strategy to building crisis resilience over time would make healthy diets affordable and available for all of Africa's population, including the poor, women, children, and other vulnerable people, which aligns with African leaders' vision of accelerated transformation of food systems for shared prosperity and improved livelihoods. So they have a African Countries Association that I think meets every year to discuss various things. Often there are political instabilities that play into this in terms of who attends, who doesn't attend, what kind of alliances get made or broken, and so on. System-wide enabling conditions for lasting resilience must include good governance mechanisms, adequate policies and regulation, high-quality infrastructure, functioning community networks, and reliable safety nets. It's good if we move to a situation where Africa is not seen as a poster child for hunger, food security issues, malnourishment, and undernourishment, and so on. Okay. This idea of a green wall building resilience is good, so I decided to read it. Ecosystem protection and rehabilitation is fundamental to building the resilience of food systems, particularly as climate change worsens. The Great Green Wall Initiative is a major effort in the Sahel region intended to restore degraded landscapes across an 8,000-kilometer strip of land between Senegal and Djibouti. So you're going from west to east. Initially, this ambitious Pan-African program proposed conducting a 15-kilometer wide wall of trees, but this goal was abandoned in favor of a more realistic mosaic of diverse landscape interventions, including natural regeneration, agroforestry, horticulture, livestock, apiculture, which is growing bees, and water catchment infrastructure in addition to reforestation. Attention to the technical, social, and economic dimensions of this effort is essential to ensure success in improving environmental and socio-economic outcomes. However, a recent study showed that most of the restoration strategies designed in 12 participating countries to shape the Great Green Wall Initiative largely fell short in identifying potential benefits for different vulnerable or demographic groups, especially female-headed households and pastoralists, while potential risk for capture of the benefits by elite groups was not assessed. On the financial side, it will require an estimated $44 billion under the base scenario to fund all proposed land restoration activities, which would increase the economic value of Sahelian ecosystems over time in terms of food, fodder, timber, and carbon sequestration, with an expected break-even point at most 10 years of implementation. At most 10 years after implementation. Okay, wrong emphasis. So here is a quick map of the overview of country level relative vulnerability. You can see that west to east there are ends which have high or extremely high relative vulnerability, very high in this dark orange colors, which is a large part of Africa and Asia as well. High India and Western Asia, and moderate in these Central Asian countries and Brazil here, and this should be which country is that? Down Malaysia, yeah, you figured Laos and Cambodia maybe, and minor risks and Ukraine. Ukraine is not counted here because of the conflicts going on. The indicators used for this assessment included existing dependency on the Black Sea region, so exposure to the other suppliers that have implemented export restrictions, current level of wheat stocks to determine countries' buffer capacity, consequences of countries' current accounts of price increases for various commodities, positive or negative effects depending on trade structure of the countries, and 5, existing level of undernourishment, food price inflation, and expected impacts of the changes in world prices on domestic food bills and household food security. So it depends on how much of the income has to be set aside for food purchases and basic amenities, and how much you have left for buffers against shocks and so on. Recommendations for food crises, another region here, South Asia. A combination of short and long-term measures are required to tackle food system crises in South Asia. These include identification of vulnerable households and groups, women, children, elderly, disabled persons, to provide them adequate support. The current food shock could be used as an opportunity to strengthen social safety nets, and targeted food consumption subsidies could be explored to gradually replace broader food consumption subsidies. Promotion of intra-regional trade, including removal of recently adopted protectionist policies, given that trade within South Asia is quite limited compared with other regional blocs. Okay, so intra-regional trade, including removal of recently adopted protectionist policies. Increasing production by improving smallholders' access to modern technologies and inputs, especially for women and other disadvantaged groups, including facilitating access to fertilizers, promoting crop diversification, and boosting innovative technologies and approaches. Smart agriculture in India is also adding early warning systems for water, irrigation, crop selection, etc. So let's see how that plays out in terms of increasing farmers' incomes, which is a critical test of how well smart agriculture is working. Stepped up investments in customized climate resilient agriculture for longer run sustainability, which can be supported by repurposing existing agricultural support. So some some countries spend a lot on agricultural support, including research and development. US is the highest in the world, which shows in terms of its advances in GMOs, productivity, sustained yields, and so on and so forth. Long-term systematic preparedness to mitigate disruptions in food systems, including strategic and resilient food security programs. Other South Asian countries could gain valuable insights from India's National Disaster Management Authority and One Nation, One Ration Card, and from Bangladesh's National Action Plan for Food Security and the effective implementation of its food-friendly program. So India and Bangladesh have done some things which are worthy of repeating and imitating and transferring. Beyond these measures, South Asian countries should align with the international development agencies for funding support to build resilience in the agri-food system. They should also develop a long-term strategic framework to address the macroeconomic mismanagement in Pakistan and Sri Lanka, conflict in Afghanistan, and the refugee crisis in Bangladesh, and establish a continual support to improve governance. So Sri Lanka and Pakistan have serious financial issues related to some wrong choices and so on, and Bangladesh has to deal with the Rohingyas and so on. So these are all specific region-specific issues requiring region-specific actions, short-term and long-term, and planning and policies and so on. The Latin American region has experienced significant economic and political volatility exacerbated by extreme climate events and natural disasters. Several policy measures related to macroeconomic and financial issues, some of which we have discussed elsewhere in this course. Climate change, health and social interventions are also related to these policy measures. They have been recommended here to advance the short and medium term challenges generated by those shocks. LAC countries are now burdened by pandemic related increases in debt and face a host of pre-existing economic and social problems, as well as the threat of climate related disasters. To tackle the current challenges and prepare for likely future shocks, they will need substantial financial support from international organizations to implement the policies that will put them on a path toward greater stability, equality, and resilience. Okay, so with the initial 7 chapters focused broadly on global issues, these regional studies are very critical because these things are always, climate impacts are local, food security issues are local, global markets have local impacts, and policies and solutions and long-term resilience plans all have to be local. So this is important to keep these in mind, even though I didn't read all of them. You can definitely go back and follow up. The report is very nice and fairly long, but very useful if you're interested in responses to food crises to build resilience. So it's going beyond managing events, crises as they happen, and also building resilience for the future to reduce impacts and hasten recovery. Okay?